Maya Collins came within one bad night of disappearing from this city forever. Not because she gave up. Not because she stopped fighting. But because Chicago had been dismantling every handhold she reached for, quietly, efficiently, almost impersonally, until the night she walked into an alley and found an old man bleeding on the ground and made a decision that cost her everything she had left. Which, at that point, wasn't much. By the time the truth of that night finally came back around to her, she was standing on a street corner with a single canvas bag, waiting for a bus out of the city. She had $17 in her pocket. No identification. No coat. And a photograph of her late husband that she believed was gone forever. What she did not know, what she could not have known, was that the man she'd saved was looking for her. Had been looking for her for 3 months. And that what he'd found, when he found her, was going to change both of their lives in ways neither of them had words for yet. This is that story. All of it. Including the parts that are hard to sit with. Especially those. Before we go any further, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We read every single one. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. These are the kinds of stories that show you what people are actually made of when nobody is watching. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Maya Collins was 30 years old, and she had spent the last 14 months learning the precise speed at which a life could come apart. She had grown up in Waukegan, north of Chicago. Daughter of a teacher and a postal worker. Nobody had extra money. Everyone had exactly enough. And the lesson you absorbed before you were old enough to question it was simple: you showed up for people. You showed up even when it was inconvenient. You showed up especially then. She put herself through nursing school at Loyola on scholarships, loans, and a cafeteria job she worked every weekend for 2 years without missing a shift. She earned her RN and spent the next 5 years in the cardiac unit at Northwestern Memorial doing the kind of work that required not just skill but a particular quality of attention, the kind you couldn't fake, the kind that either lived in you or it didn't. Her department head wrote in her review, "Maya Collins is the best nurse on this floor. Possibly the best I've seen in 20 years. She met Marcus at a fundraiser for a community clinic she volunteered at on Saturdays. He was a middle school history teacher with wire-rimmed glasses and a way of explaining things that made you feel like you'd understood them all along. They married after 18 months. They started talking, carefully and hopefully, about children. And then Marcus had a headache one night that didn't go away. And then an MRI. And then a name for something that had no cure and a timeline measured in months. Maya took leave from the hospital to care for him. She did for her husband what she had spent years training to do for strangers, except now there was no professional distance. No team around her. No equipment. Just love, and debt, and watching someone you would have traded places with in a heartbeat get smaller and quieter and further away. When Marcus died on a Wednesday morning in April, she was 3 months behind on rent and carrying debt she couldn't calculate without her hands shaking. The collapse wasn't dramatic. It was just math. By the following January, Maya Collins, former cardiac nurse, former wife, former person with a future she could picture, was sleeping in the tunnels under the Blue Line station at Washington Street. Keeping her backpack pressed against her chest through the night. Carrying herself with the posture of a woman who had decided the street was not going to take that from her too. She had a photograph of Marcus tucked in a zippered pouch inside the bag. A nursing license expired 8 months ago. A folder of documents she guarded like they were the last proof she had ever been anyone. She had $17. She was heading to the Halsted Street shelter to try for a bed before they were gone. She almost made it. It was a Tuesday evening in January, and Chicago had turned the kind of cold that doesn't feel like weather. It feels like a warning. Maya was cutting through the alley behind West Monroe Street when she saw him. Elderly man. Well-dressed. The kind of shoes that didn't belong in an alley. Half hidden in shadow between a dumpster and the wall of a dry-cleaning business. Not moving. She stopped. 2 blocks ahead, a couple in matching winter jackets crossed the alley entrance without looking in. A delivery driver rattled his cart past the man, 2 feet away, and kept going. A teenager glanced in, registered what he saw, looked back at his phone, and walked on. Nobody stopped. Maya stood there for a moment with the cold pressing in from all sides and the shelter clock running in the back of her mind. Then she walked into the alley. Up close, the picture became clearer. Breathing, yes, shallow but present, the first thing she checked because it was the first thing she'd been trained to check. Blood on the left side of his face. Coat collar torn. Pockets turned inside out. Watch gone. Mugging. Men who had made a calculation about an elderly man alone after dark. She crouched beside him, checked his pulse. Present. Weak. His skin temperature was already dropping, which meant he'd been here long enough to matter. She pulled off her own jacket, the fleece-lined one from a church donation bin, the only coat she owned, and spread it over him. Then she pulled out her cracked prepaid phone and called 911. While she waited, she tore a strip of fabric from the bottom of her own undershirt and pressed it against the wound on his face with the steady, two-handed pressure of someone who had done this in a hospital with better equipment and now had to make do with what she had. "You're okay," she said quietly. She didn't know if he could hear her. She said it anyway. "Help is coming. I'm right here." He stirred. His eyes opened partway. Pale blue. Confused and frightened in the way old eyes get when the world stops making sense. "Don't leave," he said. "I'm not leaving." She meant it. Even though it was 18 degrees. Even though every minute she stayed was another minute the shelter beds were disappearing. Even though she hadn't eaten since morning and her body was past the point of comfortable. She stayed. The paramedics arrived 17 minutes later. One of them, a young woman named Megan Mercer, looked at Maya's improvised bandage and said, "Did you do this? Pressure's the main thing in the cold. You have medical training." Former nurse. They loaded him onto the stretcher. He caught Maya's wrist as they lifted him. "Thank you," he said. "You don't need to thank me. What's your name?" "Maya." He said it the way people say things they intend to remember. Then the ambulance lights swept red across the alley walls and disappeared into traffic. And Maya was alone in the cold with no jacket, no shelter bed, and $17. She reached the shelter at 7:43. The man at the intake desk, a man named Scott Walker with a clipboard and the look of someone who had long ago decided that most people were the cause of their own situations, looked up at her. "Beds are full. Last one went at 7:15. She signed the wait list. She walked back out into January. A woman named Riley Brooks worked at the shelter. Maybe 50 years old, built with the tired kindness that accumulates in people who spend decades doing work the world underpays. She found Maya on the front steps, arms wrapped around her own chest, jacket gone. "Where's your coat?" Maya told her. Riley went inside and came back with a donation blanket and a cup of broth from the soup station. She sat down beside Maya without asking for more of the story. "You should have let someone else handle it," she said gently. Maya looked at the street. At the cars moving through the cold. At the city doing what cities do, pressing forward regardless of what was happening to any single person inside it. "There wasn't anyone else handling it," she said. Riley nodded. They sat in silence for a while. What Maya didn't say, sitting there in the dark with someone else's blanket around her shoulders, was the thing she was beginning to understand in a way she hadn't let herself understand before. She was tired. Not sleepy tired. Something deeper. The kind that sets in when you have been applying effort to a situation that does not respond to effort. When you have been doing everything right and watching it not matter. When you have been carrying your dignity like a piece of luggage through a terminal that keeps telling you there are no available flights. She was tired. But she didn't say it. Not yet. She slept in the Blue Line tunnel that night, wrapped in the blanket, back against a concrete column, listening to the footsteps of people who had somewhere to be. The week after she saved the man in the alley, things got worse. It started with the backpack. She set it down for 4 minutes in a laundromat on Adams Street while she used the bathroom. For minutes. When she came back, it was gone. Her change of clothes. Her documents. Her nursing license. Her zippered pouch. Marcus's photograph. Everything. She stood in the middle of the laundromat and did not cry. Crying required energy she had designated for other things. What she did was stand very still and do the accounting that survival demands. What do I have? What do I need? What is the next step? There was no clean next step. Without her identification, she couldn't apply for most jobs. Without her nursing license, she couldn't even begin that conversation. Without a permanent address, applications moved through the system the way all inconvenient things move through systems, slowly, and without urgency. She went to the Department of Human Services office on North Wabash and explained the situation to a woman named Danielle Walker who had 47 other cases that day. 4 to 6 weeks for a replacement ID. Maya asked. Sometimes 8, Danielle said, not unkindly. The backlog is significant. Maya nodded and left and walked 12 blocks through the cold to Northwestern Memorial Hospital. She had worked there for 5 years. She had colleagues there. She had a department head who had called her the best nurse he'd seen in 20 years. She asked to speak with the hospital administrator. She waited 90 minutes in a lobby she used to walk through every day without stopping. Colin Hayes came out to meet her in the lobby rather than taking her upstairs to his office. She noticed that immediately. He looked at her the way a person looks when they are confronting a version of the world they have successfully avoided. Maya, he said, lowering his voice. You were an excellent nurse. One of the best I've ever seen. I need to talk about a position. Something on the floor, or even intake. He shook his head. Small and definitive. There's a hiring freeze. Colin. My license lapsed because I was caring for my husband while he was dying. The circumstance was. I understand the circumstance, he said. And then, quieter, careful in the way of a man protecting himself from his own discomfort, but I can't explain to the board why someone currently without a stable address is representing Northwestern's cardiac department. The optics of the unit. She looked at him. He had the decency not to hold her gaze. I'll keep your information on file, he said. She thanked him. She thanked him because that was what you did, and because fury without outlet just burns you from the inside, and she needed every calorie she had left. She walked out of Northwestern Memorial, the building she had given 5 years of her life to, and stood on the sidewalk in the cold, and felt the specific weight of being invisible to people who used to know your name. February came and then March, and between them arrived a series of almost moments that were almost worse than outright rejection. A warehouse position where the supervisor told her she was overqualified. A community training program that had filled its slots 2 weeks before she applied. A staffing agency that couldn't process her application without a current state ID. And then, the worst one. A social services coordinator position at a community center that didn't require active medical licensure. She interviewed carefully, answered every question honestly, and 2 days later received a call telling her she had the job. She went back to the shelter that evening and felt something she hadn't felt in months. Something light and terrible. Hope. The offer was rescinded 4 days later. A funding cut. The position was eliminated before she'd started. Maya sat on the edge of a cot in the shelter's common area that night and held the palms of her hands together and stared at the floor. She thought about the bus station on Harrison Street. She thought about her mother's house north of the city. She thought about what it meant to leave, not just the city, but the version of herself who believed things could still turn around. She thought about leaving. She didn't make the decision that night. But she stopped fighting the direction it was pulling. His name was Leonard Henderson, and she had not known this. She hadn't known it because the name Leonard Henderson meant something specific and significant in Chicago, in healthcare, in philanthropy, in rooms where people talked about legacies, but not in the Blue Line Tunnel. Not in the Halstead Street shelter. Not in the laundromat on Adams Street or the Department of Human Services office on North Wabash. In those places, a name like Leonard Henderson meant nothing at all. Leonard Henderson had built the Henderson Health Group from a single South Side clinic in the 1970s into a system with 11 hospitals and a foundation that funded community health programs across 16 cities. He had retired 12 years ago. He was worth, by various estimates, somewhere north of $300 million. He had been walking home from a dinner meeting the night Maya found him. Had dismissed his driver because the evening seemed mild enough for 15 minutes of walking. The kind of small miscalculation that most people make without consequence. He had been conscious for most of the 11 minutes he spent in that alley before Maya appeared. Conscious enough to hear footsteps approach. Conscious enough to register, each time, when they kept going. And then someone stopped. From the hospital, he had instructed his assistant, a careful and thorough man named Brady Grant who had worked for Leonard for 11 years, to find the woman who stayed. Brady had started with the paramedics. Then the emergency department. Then a quiet, methodical canvass of the neighborhood around West Monroe Street. It had taken 3 months, because the woman he was looking for had no fixed address, no digital footprint, and no institutional connection that made her easy to trace. But Brady Grant did not give up on things Leonard Henderson cared about. He found her. And in the 2 weeks after he found her, he found everything else. Her nursing record. Her patient satisfaction scores, 93rd percentile. The department head's review. Her loan documents. Marcus's death certificate. The shelter intake logs. The job rejections. The rescinded offer. The Department of Human Services waitlist that had stretched to 9 weeks. And a receipt. A CVS pharmacy on West Jackson Street timestamped 9:17 p.m. on the night Maya found Leonard in the alley. Gauze. Antiseptic pads. Medical tape. $19.60. Her last money. Leonard read all of it. He took his time. He sat in his study and went through every document the way he had read business proposals for 40 years, without rushing to a conclusion before the evidence was complete. Then he called Brady. "I need to see her," he said. "Not in an office. Find out where she'll be." But here is what Brady did not tell Maya when he found her. Here is what Leonard did not tell her on the phone. Brady had flagged something in his report that gave Leonard pause. A formal inquiry had been opened by the Illinois Department of Professional Regulation 2 months after Maya's license lapsed, not initiated by Maya, but by someone at Northwestern Memorial who had filed a concern about the circumstances of her extended absence and the lapse period itself. The inquiry had gone nowhere. It had been closed without action. But it was on record. And Leonard's foundation legal team, when Brady briefed them on the plan, raised a question that stopped the room. If the Henderson Foundation publicly sponsored a nurse whose license had lapsed under an open inquiry, even a closed one, and if that fact surfaced after the clinic opened, it could expose the foundation to reputational risk and potentially freeze the clinic's operating license during a review period. Brady presented the concern to Leonard on a Monday morning. Leonard listened carefully. Then he asked one question. Who filed the concern at Northwestern? Brady told him. The name was Colin Hayes. Leonard was quiet for a long moment. "Get me the full file," he said. "And get me his personnel record. Because a man who tells a former nurse she is too good to be helped by his hospital, and then files a regulatory concern to make sure no one else can help her either, is not a man whose legal exposure I'm interested in protecting." What Brady found in the personnel file, he delivered to Leonard by Wednesday. And what Leonard delivered to his legal team by Thursday was a decision. They were going to help Maya Collins. And if Colin Hayes wanted to test that decision in a public forum, Leonard Henderson had 40 years of experience in exactly that kind of fight. The inquiry would not be a problem. The 3rd week of March. A Thursday morning. Maya Collins stood at the corner of Harrison Street and Michigan Avenue with a single canvas bag at her feet, waiting for a bus. The lake was gray in the distance. 34 degrees, almost warm after what the winter had been. She had made her decision. She was leaving Chicago, and she would figure out the rest from her mother's house, and she was not going to think too hard about what it meant to be a woman who was once called the best nurse on a cardiac floor standing at a bus stop with a single bag and nowhere specific to go. A black town car pulled to the curb. She didn't pay it attention. Town cars pulled up on Michigan Avenue all the time. But then the rear door opened, and a man stepped out, and something in Maya's chest went very still. Late 70s. White hair. A cane she hadn't seen in the alley. A faint scar on his left cheek that she recognized immediately, because she was the one who had held fabric against it on a January night while everyone else kept walking. He looked at her with an expression she had to study before she could name it. It was the look of a person who has been searching for something for a very long time and has just found it exactly where he stopped expecting to. "Maya," he said. She stared at him. "You may not remember." "I remember you," she said. "West Monroe Street." "The alley?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. "I've been trying to find you for 3 months." They sat inside the town car because the March wind off the lake was insistent, and Maya accepted the offer with the practical calm she had developed for situations where the alternative was pride. Leonard Henderson did not waste time. "I know you spent your last money on me," he said. $19.60 at a CVS on West Jackson. Gauze, antiseptic, medical tape. I know you lost your shelter bed that night. I know you gave me your coat and slept without it. I know about your husband. I know about Northwestern and the hiring freeze that wasn't entirely a hiring freeze." He paused. "And I know about the photograph." Something shifted in Maya's face. Small but real. "Brady traced the security footage from the laundromat," Leonard said. "He found the bag. The photograph had been sold to a second-hand store on North Clark Street. He bought it 4 days ago." He produced a plain envelope and held it out. Maya took it. She held it for a moment without opening it. Just held it, the way you hold something when you're not sure you're ready for what's inside. Then she opened it. "Marcus at Navy Pier." His arm around her shoulders. Both of them laughing at something the camera didn't catch. Their second anniversary. The day he had first told her, using those exact words, that she was the best thing that had ever happened to him. Maya's hand began to tremble. Not much. Just enough. She tried to speak. She couldn't. "I thought I lost him twice," she said finally, and the words came out smaller than she intended, barely above a breath. Leonard Henderson looked out the window at the passing street and gave her a moment that cost him nothing and meant everything. When she finally looked up, her eyes were dry. She had decided something. "What do you want?" she asked. Directly. Because she was Maya Collins, and she had been on the street for 14 months, and she had learned that people who pull up in town cars with plain envelopes generally want something in return. "I want to give you something," he said. "Not charity. Accuracy. What you did has a value, and the world currently has that value priced completely wrong, and I am in a position to correct the pricing." "What does that mean in practical terms?" He almost smiled. "It means I'd like to talk to you about a clinic." Brady Grant had already moved on the documents. The replacement ID arrived in 5 business days. Social Security documentation followed. The regulatory inquiry, the one Colin Hayes had filed, was reviewed by the state board, found to be without basis, and formally closed with a notation that the original complaint appeared to have been motivated by factors unrelated to patient care. That notation went into the permanent record. Leonard had made sure of it. Then he took Maya to meet Julia Grant. Julia ran the Henderson Foundation's community health initiatives with the kind of focused, non-negotiable energy that comes from 20 years of trying to solve problems that require both competence and compassion. She was direct. She did not waste sentences. She walked Maya through the Henderson Community Clinic, a renovated 2-story building at 63rd and Cottage Grove on the south side. Designed to serve uninsured and underinsured families. Fully funded. Fully equipped. Everything it needed was someone to lead the nursing staff. Maya looked at the floor plans, the staffing charts, the services listed. Then she looked up. "Who else is on the board?" she asked. Julia paused. 7 members. 6 fully supportive. And the 7th? Warren Pierce has concerns about the leadership structure. They found out what those concerns were 4 days later, in a conference room at the Henderson Foundation, when Warren Pierce looked across the table at Maya and said, with the measured tone of a man who considers himself entirely reasonable, "Ms. Collins, no one is questioning your clinical background. But the Foundation has to consider how it presents publicly. Placing someone with an extended period of housing instability in a patient-facing leadership role creates questions the board has an obligation to ask." He said, "Housing instability, the way you say something when you've decided the polite version of a word is still more polite than the word deserves." Maya looked at him. She did not look away. Then Leonard Henderson, who had been sitting quietly at the end of the table, set down his pen. "Warren," he said, "let me clarify something. The woman across from you held the highest patient satisfaction scores on her floor at Northwestern for 3 consecutive years. She spent 14 months navigating a healthcare system and a social services system that failed her at every turn, and she is still here, still qualified, and still the reason I'm alive to have this conversation today." He paused. "What she is not is a liability. What she is the most qualified person I have met in 40 years of building healthcare organizations for exactly this job. The question before this board is not whether Maya Collins is capable of leading this clinic. The question is whether this board is capable of seeing past its own assumptions long enough to make the right decision." Warren Pierce looked at his water glass. The vote was 6-1. The Henderson Community Clinic at 63rd and Cottage Grove opened on a Thursday in late May. Not with a ribbon. Not with a press event. A handwritten sign in the window and a post shared by Riley Brooks and 3 shelter workers who had watched Maya survive the city and trusted her enough to tell people so. The first patient was a woman named Natalie Hale, 32 years old, who had been putting off a respiratory problem for 4 months because she couldn't afford a copay. She sat in the exam room, slightly braced for the transaction that healthcare usually was. Maya took her history with the specific quality of attention she had always given patients. The kind where you listen for what's underneath what they're telling you. "How long have you been in transitional housing?" Maya asked. Natalie looked up. "Since October." "Does that matter for the appointment?" "It matters for your care," Maya said simply. "I want the full picture." Natalie nodded slowly. Like someone who hadn't expected to be told the full picture was something she was allowed to offer. A nurse named Leah Hayes joined the staff the 2nd week. A social worker named Serena Brooks built the referral network Maya had designed from scratch, the one that connected medical intake directly to housing assistance and financial services, because Maya had spent 14 months learning exactly which problems came tangled together and could not be treated one at a time. Leonard came by on a Wednesday afternoon 3 weeks after opening and walked slowly through rooms that were full. He watched Maya explain a treatment plan to an elderly patient. Watched her crouch down to his level, hold eye contact, speak in the measured certain voice of someone who was doing exactly the thing they were made to do. He didn't interrupt. He sat in a plastic chair in the waiting area and watched the clinic breathe. When Maya came out and saw him, she said, "You should have called. I didn't want you to clean the place up." "It doesn't need cleaning." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." They sat together for a few minutes while Chicago moved around them, loud and indifferent and full, in spite of that, of people trying to help each other. "You saved me when the world had already decided I wasn't worth stopping for," Leonard said quietly. "I didn't need someone rich that night," Maya said. "I needed someone there." "You were there." "I was there," she said. Out on the sidewalk, a man was reading the sign in the window. Canvas bag over one shoulder. The specific compressed posture of someone who had been trying to take up less space than the world assigned him. Maya recognized it. She knew it from the inside. She stood up, went to the door, and opened it before he could finish deciding. She smiled the way she had always smiled at patients who weren't sure they were welcome. Not the bright performance of a place trying to sell something. The real kind. The kind that said, you are a person, and this is a place where people are treated like people, and you don't need anything other than what you already have to walk through this door. Come in, she said. We're open. He came in. And that is the whole story. Except that it isn't. Because it will happen again tomorrow. And the day after. And every day the doors open, which is every day now, and every day from here. The thing about one act of kindness is that it does not stay one act. It multiplies in every person it touches. It becomes the reason someone walks into an alley, and the reason a clinic exists, and the reason a man with a canvas bag comes through a door on a Thursday morning when he wasn't sure anyone was waiting. Months earlier, Maya Collins stood in an alley when no one else would. Now, every morning, she opens a door for the people the world still walks past. That is not a coincidence. That is how kindness works when it's the real kind. The kind you give when it costs you something. The kind that finds its way back, not because the universe runs on fairness, but because someone was paying attention. And sometimes that is enough. Sometimes that is everything. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And subscribe, we'll see you in the next one.